Hello everybody and welcome back to Alan Wall's Photography. I am Alan. This is episode 9 in our Lightroom Basics tutorial series. Hey everybody, I hope your photo editing is going well. This should not be a particularly long video. What we're going to do is we're going to clean up the couple of panels that we haven't touched in the develop module. Then we're going to go back over to the tools on the left hand side of the develop module, the things we skipped earlier on, the presets, snapshots and history tabs. And that'll pretty much wrap it up. But if we have time at the end of this video, I'm also going to show you how to use the merge function for making panoramas and HDR images. So that'll be useful. Let's get started right away. We'll be looking at the effects panel. It's the second to last one to the bottom. And in this panel, you have two tools. There's the post-crop vignetting tool and the grain tool. And I'll show you how to use each of them. The post-crop vignetting tool is different than the other vignette tools that we've seen, mainly in the lens correction panel. If you mess with the vignette, or if you create a vignette in the lens correction panel, it is going to affect only the original photograph edges. So if you've cropped your photograph at all, it'll mess with the vignette. The post-crop vignetting tool that we're looking at now will vignette whatever your photograph is left as size-wise after you've done your crop. So this is where you would want to add an artistic vignette if you're into that kind of thing. I'm not really. I don't use it very often, but it's really straightforward. You have the usual kinds of sliders. There's an amount slider. If you slide that to the right, that is a white vignette, or it removes the dark pixels, like so. If you slide it to the left, it gives you the more typical dark vignette. I guess it's more typical. I don't know. You just don't see them very much anymore. Maybe I just don't notice them. So that's the amount anyway. You can see that it becomes heavier depending which way I go. You know, I forgot to tell you something. There are 3 different kinds of vignetting that you can apply. Highlight priority means that the highlights in the vignetted areas are protected, so they'll still show up. Color priority means the color in the vignetted areas will still show up. And the paint overlay is an old-fashioned version of the vignette tool that basically just puts black pixels up in the corners. I wouldn't ever mess with this. The results don't look very good. You're better off just staying on highlight priority. I think that does the best job. The midpoint, this is interesting. The midpoint in a vignette is, let's make a vignette first. We'll make a black one. The midpoint is how close to the center of the photograph does the vignette reach. As you go to the right, it moves the vignette out to the edges of the photograph. If you slide it to the left, the midpoint gets much closer into the center of the image, right? Pretty straightforward. Now, I'm going to skip roundness and show you feather first, and there's a reason for that. The feather is just as you would imagine. It's the amount of tail off from your vignette as you get into the photograph. The more feathered it is, the more gentle the edges are. The less feathered it is, the sharper the edges are until it starts to look kind of nutty like this. But I'm going to slide the feathering all the way to 0 to keep this hard edge to show you what the slider before, the roundness slider, does. If you slide to the right, it makes your vignette more circular, like so. If you slide the slider to the left, it makes it more rectangular, like so. See the difference? Good, because there's a nifty trick that we can do with those sliders. The highlights part, I'll have to lower the intensity of the vignette to show you what this does. The highlights part just allows you to decide how much of the highlights from the corners get preserved. It's a very subtle difference. Okay, so that's really all there is to it. As far as the trick I was going to show you, every now and again I like to put a border on a photograph. If it's going to be appearing in print, in some of the stuff that I print myself, sometimes this border is useful. I use it when I'm printing photographs of insects. But let me show you how you can make that border. The first thing is you've got to get rid of all the feathering. Then you've got to get rid of almost all of the roundness. Then move the midpoint. Hang on, there we go. Move the midpoint in from the outside towards the outside edges. There you go. And then make the vignette either completely black or completely white, like that. And it'll give you a nice sharp border on the picture that's perfectly symmetrical, and it doesn't have any color pixels in it. So there you go. That's just one little thing that you can do with it. And as always, if you just double click on the name of the tool, it'll set everything back to where it was. All right, vignetting done. Check it off your list. Next, grain. Let me find a picture of a human person. I have one. I took a photograph of a human once, and here he is. All right, what does the grain do? The whole purpose of the grain is to emulate the look of film. And yeah, I don't shoot film, but it seems to me that if you wanted grain in your film, you would just get a film camera. But anyway, nobody asked me when they were inventing the grain slider. What it does is basically just add grain. And where it can be useful in our photo editing is if you have banding, sometimes adding a little grain will hide some of that. It's also useful in some circumstances to make noise a little bit less jarring. If you have to shoot at a very high ISO, sometimes adding some grain to that will smooth over the noise. But anyway, most of the time what it's used for is to give that photorealistic, film realistic look to skin. So there's an amount slider. Normal setting is 0, no grain. And you'll notice the other two sliders are blacked out if there's no grain. And as you add grain to the photograph, you'll see this pattern that looks kind of like noise, but it's more regular. And once you've applied some amount of some amount of grain, then you can change the size of the grains from very tiny, giving that very sandy looking effect, all the way up to ginormous, which really softens the picture a lot. And that's not even as high as it goes. Yeah, it's very much what you think looks good in your photographs. This is another thing I don't ever use because I don't really shoot people that much, so I don't get into this. Though the looks can be nice. Roughness is just the edginess of the little micro dots, and again, I'm really not sure what difference it really makes. I'm sure that somebody out there who's a master of applying grain to photographs would tell me all about what the roughness does. It just makes the grain look a little bit more dodgy as you get higher. Anyway, that's what the grain is. Let's bump that up and see what it looks like. Well, I think it looks quite nice. Yeah, whatever. That's the grain. All right. Next tool panel is the one at the bottom. Camera Calibration. Now, the purpose of this is to allow the Lightroom user to change the way that Lightroom displays colors. This is different than changing the hue or the saturation in a given color in a particular photograph. That's what happens in the HSL slider, and this changes the baseline on which Lightroom is going to compute your white balance. And the best advice I can give you is leave it the heck alone. If you want to calibrate your screen, get one of those X-Rite checkers. I use that to make sure that my colors are accurate. And then just leave your process version where it is. Well, actually, that's not true, because this process version is 4. There is a more recent one, so I will change that to update it to the most current. But once you're on that, I wouldn't mess with these sliders, because when you do, it's going to mess with the colors in all of your photographs. So a word to the wise there. So the only thing you really need to do in this panel is just to make absolutely sure that you're on the most current version, unless putting it on the most current version somehow interferes with the quality of your picture. Then put it on the original process version that it was put into Lightroom with. But that's about it. So stay away from it and you'll be fine. And get an X-Rite checker. They're stupidly expensive, but they really work well to keep your colors predictable and true. All right, guys, that's everything on the right that we have covered. So we can move away from that, and we're going to get back over onto the left-hand side of the develop module and look at the things we didn't cover previously. On the left-hand side of the develop module, at the top is your navigator, and that is exactly the same as the tool in the library module. Basically, it allows you to preview the photographs in your film strip, and you can control the size of the image and the ratio of the magnification, anywhere from 1 to 1, which gives you a nice zoomed in. There we go. All the way up to, I think, 8 to 1, 11 to 1. There you go. So that's the navigator panel, exactly the same as in the library module. Let's talk about presets. I am not a huge fan of presets, and that's not because there's anything wrong with them. The way I learned to use Lightroom, I didn't heavily use presets. And when I'm teaching Lightroom, I usually don't emphasize the use of presets to my students. Every look that you can get using a preset, you can actually make using the right-hand side of the develop module. And while I think it's fine to use a preset, it becomes problematic if you use the preset instead of learning how to edit the photograph. You see what I'm saying? But anyway, there are a bunch of presets that are already loaded by Adobe. There are color presets, creative presets, and black and white presets. There are also presets for the tone curve, the grain, and the sharpening that we talked about earlier, and the vignetting. So you can apply a lot of effects to your photograph using these presets if you want. The reason I don't use them that much is I'll apply a preset and then I'll go and start fiddling around with changing things more to my taste, and by the time I'm done it doesn't look anything like the preset. So that's the reason. Anyhow, one quick way to find out what your presets look like is to just hover over them. If you hover over the presets, it will change the image to show you what it would look like with that preset applied. All a preset is a set of editing changes that are packed together into a data file that you can then apply. It's just as if you went into the right-hand side of the panel and made each of the changes that are in that file. You'd get the same result. So it's a shortcut is what it is. And you know, depending on your style of photography, there may be one or two of these that just nail it. They're perfect. If you do a lot of landscape, say, and there's one particular look that really works for your style of photography, then by all means use a preset. The most powerful option, or the most powerful way to use the presets, is by creating your own, and I'm going to show you how to do that. But anyway, it's worth scanning down through these to see what kind of looks they give. Some of the black and white ones are actually pretty nifty, and definitely worth taking a look at. And the curves are basically the curved ones just give you different types of contrast. That's what we do in the tone curves. You've seen that video, I'm sure. But this is just a shortcut to giving those different flavors of contrast. Grain we just talked about 2 seconds ago, and these shortcuts presets will just add that amount of grain, light, medium, and heavy. Sharpening is obvious, it sharpens, and vignetting, well, there you go, that's a medium vignette. Oh, I'm zoomed out. There you go, you can see it now. That's the medium vignette, that's the heavy vignette. I can't honestly see why you would press that button and not go over here and make your own vignette. But there you go, user presets. Now this is where I can see they could be useful. Again, I don't use them a lot, but I've made a lot of them, mostly showing people how I make presets. Let's make a preset just so that you can see how straightforward it is. We'll stick with this photograph. Let's undo that vignetting though. None. There you go. All right, so you've taken your photograph. It looks pretty good, and you've got hundreds of these owls sitting on a chimney photographs. So you do your editing. We'll just make a couple of changes to something. We'll move the white point and the black point around a little bit. We'll add some texture. We'll obviously, none of these are, I'm not even looking at the photograph. I'm just trying to create a bunch of changes. Okay, that's what we decide we like. It's terrible, I know, but it's for a reason. That's going to look sufficiently different from the original. Yeah. So we've made the changes, and we now want to, we look at that and say, oh, that's exactly perfect for owls on chimneys photographs. I want to save that. So what you do is you go to the presets menu all the way at the top where it says presets, and click the plus sign, and then create preset. Now we'll call it owls on chimneys. There. Always name your presets something smart that you'll be able to know what it is. If you name them with some number series or you know, some weird non-descriptive terms, you'll never remember what it does. So I actually write down exactly what it is the preset's for. Another important tip: uncheck any of these check boxes that you do not want to add in your preset. If you don't need a particular edit included in the preset, uncheck it here, because like we didn't do any split toning here, so we don't need to add split toning data to this photograph. These files just get very, very big, and your catalog can get bogged down, and it can slow down Lightroom. So when you've checked all the ones you do want to include in the preset, just hit create. And now in our user presets, we should have one that says owls on chimneys. There it is. Okay, so let's find another owl on a chimney. I don't have one. Let's instead go with any old photograph. Here we go. Here's a bird on a stick. Let's apply owls on a chimney to it. No, let's not. But you get my point. You could apply owls on a chimney to it. It's just too dark. It would look terrible. I must have something lighter to put it on. I've got a building here. This was the building that we were trying to knock over with the geometry corrections. We'll add owls on a chimney to that. And it adds exactly the editing changes that we made on the owl. Okay? So now you can go back to that anytime you want. Any questions? You in the back. All right, let's move on. If you do have any questions, leave them for me and I'll answer them. Snapshots. Snapshots are a useful tool in your editing, especially if you think you might want several different versions of a photograph edited slightly differently. Snapshots allows you to keep them so that you can compare them as you go through your editing. So what the snapshot actually is a record of a particular point in your editing chain. This is what the photograph looked like at 8/21/19 at 11:31 in the morning. Now we're editing this photograph and we think, boy, we really need to brighten up the bird, don't we? So we'll grab an adjustment brush and we'll add a few strokes over the bird like so. Then we'll bump up the exposure just a little bit, make him stand out a little bit, maybe add a little bit of saturation for the blues in his feathers. There we go. Now that's just one little change, but if we think, I quite like that, I might like to keep it like that, add another snapshot. It'll automatically name it with the time. You could name it Mockingbird number 2 if you wanted. You can put in whatever you want. I leave it with the time because at the end of this process, I'm going to erase them all anyway. So now it adds another snapshot. So now we can look at our photograph from before and after before we decide, where we want to go with our edits. It's as simple as that. Now, because of the fact that these snapshots are also fairly big files, or they can be, it's probably a good idea when you're through editing, you've picked the photographs that you want to use or export or print, and you don't need to look at any of the other versions. It's probably a good idea to remove any that you don't need. You can keep them in here, and when you open this photograph again, they'll still be there if you want to. So you don't have to get rid of them. But usually I do. So I would just hit the negative mark. Whichever snapshot is highlighted will be removed when you hit the minus sign. Okay? All right, good, excellent. The next panel we're going to talk about is the history panel. So the history is a cool tool. It allows you to take a picture and see exactly what you have done to it, editing wise. Now, of course, you can always hit the Y key to see what the imported photograph looked like and what the edited photograph looked like now. But if you want more detail, if you want to know how you got from A to B, hit the history panel and it will show you every single step that you took, all the way from, my goodness, I did a lot of stuff to that picture. All the way from import, I changed the color temperature. I bumped the exposure down 1/10 of a stop. Same with the highlights, the white clipping, black clipping. Everything I did in the order I did it is listed here. And what you can do is at any point in your history, you can click on that and it will take you back to that point in your edit. So you can pick up from there and make changes. If there's some point where you feel like you went astray in the edit, go back to that point, click on the history, and start editing again from there. Okay, so that's history. Pretty interesting stuff. We don't have anything left to talk about over there, so believe it or not, we've finished the develop panel, which is fantastic. That's a lot of stuff. Let's talk briefly about the merge function. This was added several Lightrooms ago, and every now and again I like to do a little bit of HDR processing on my images, and I happened to come across these three images. I was down in Charleston at the mouth of the bay to photograph this falling down lighthouse, and I was there very early in the morning, and I wanted to get the colors in the sky, but I also wanted the details in the rocks, and I wanted to see the waves, and my camera wasn't going to be able to capture the shapes in the clouds as well as the details in the rocks. The dynamic range was too high. So what I did was I took a photograph, this one, and then I bumped the shutter speed up by 1 stop or 1.5 stops, I think, to get this photograph. And then I moved it 1.5 stops in the other direction to get this photograph. So I have 3 exposures. This one has got the rock detail that I needed. Where are we? This one has got the cloud detail that I wanted. So we have these 3 photographs. Now I want to merge them into one high dynamic range photograph. So all I have to do is command click to select all 3 of them, and then go to the top menu. It's under photo in the top menu. I know you can't see it on your screen now, but it's the drop down menu under photo, and about the 5th one down is photo merge. And you can do this to make a panorama if you have 3 or 4 or 5 photographs in a row that you've taken. It uses the same engine. That's for the panorama, or you can do it for HDR like this. In fact, you can also do it for multiple exposures and different shots laid out in a panorama. But we're just doing it for HDR. So when you click on the HDR, it will create a preview. Make sure that you have the auto align and the auto settings checked, because this will make sure that all of the information is in the photograph and everything is lined up correctly. Ghosting is when something has moved between the photographs, and it's a good idea to be aware of where that is. We know it's going to be where the water's moving, and maybe the clouds are moving a little bit. So let's turn the deghost on, and we're going to show the overlay. And what's going to happen is we're going to see a red overlay on anything that has moved. Now, Lightroom will be able to deghost that area simply by selecting the best exposure of whatever is ghosted and not merging that part of the photograph. Okay, so here you go. You can see the red overlay showing everything that has moved between 1 or 2 of the frames. And if we accept that, then we'll, by hitting merge, we'll be telling Lightroom, okay, fix those areas by deghosting them. And that's what we'll do. So we hit merge, and it will be moved up to the top left hand side. In the progress bar will show up creating HDR, and when it's finished, it'll take the new photograph and drop it down in your film strip. The panorama works exactly the same. There are a couple of options under panorama. I'll show them to you in just a second. So this is the image that we get. Now remember, this has not been edited yet. I'd need to go in and do all my usual editing, starting off with leveling the horizon. But what we have is now all of the detail from the rocks, which we wouldn't have had in the darker photograph, but we also have lots of nice detail in the clouds, especially the wispy ones at the top. So that's how the merge function works. It just allows you to bypass your camera's HDR setting, which is always terrible, and do it yourself. And it's really pretty straightforward. I was going to show you the panorama. I'm going to select these photographs, even though we're not going to do a panorama because they're the same shot. Obviously, you've got to do this on a tripod, but if we go to the photo menu and go to Photo Merge Panorama, it's too smart for me. It knows I'm tricking it. It knows that these are actually HDR photographs because they're all the same. So, and I haven't shot a panorama in a million years, but I swear it's very simple. The default settings, just select them and create panorama, and it'll do a great job for you. That is it. That is everything for session number 9. We've covered the effects, the calibration, presets, snapshots, and history. And in the next episode, which is the last episode, we're gonna go into the map, book, slideshow, print, and web tabs, which means between now and then I need to learn what those are. I don't use them. Oh, well, I use the print one a lot, but I haven't used the others. I'll figure out what they are and I'll explain it to you as if I know what I'm talking about, if that's okay. Have a good week. Stay out of trouble. If your weather is as bad as mine, stay dry. I'll talk to you again soon. Have a good day. Bye-bye.